The child goes to the teacher who will guide that child.
What do you mean by external moral authority? You use that expression a lot.
Materialism has to do with when you are
Hello, it's great to have all of you back for the course in Values and Spirituality. In this episode, we will be looking at the interaction between teachers and students. For those of you who are following with the book, we are on book number 2, page 20. I would like to welcome Sister Denise to the studio once again. It's fabulous to have you back.
Thank you.
You go on to say, weekly sessions at the study centers are integral to this program so that you can develop a consistent and ongoing relationship with the facilitators and coordinators who are also personally committed to cultivating and developing spirituality. You are encouraged to discuss the concepts with them in depth and gain from their life experience. You spoke in the previous episode of this not being a top-down system. What is it about interaction on this level that facilitates maximum learning? This is a symbiosis, isn't it?
It is, and when you have a facilitator, the function of a facilitator is not to be didactic. The sort of situation is people are sitting in a circle, and the facilitator is there to keep people on the topic, to keep them to time, and to make sure that they're not breaking the rules of communication. This is where we have the circumstance of dialogue. And so the facilitator is not telling the people what to think or what not to think. They're just holding the space. And when people are in that situation, it really encourages them to bring forth what is already within them. In the process of facilitation, when people have all spoken, the facilitator will give a resume or a précis of what has been spoken, ensuring that everyone knows they've been heard, and preparing the group for going to the next level of discussion. So it's a very different kind of pedagogy from the normal way, the usual traditional way.
We now go to page 21, where you bring in the practical application of the values as opposed to just the theory. It reads, values that are lived and demonstrated inspire positive change. However, if you have not inculcated those values into your life and pay only lip service to them, they turn into negative attitudes that go against higher consciousness. What do you mean? That is, it's a bit frightening to know that something positive can become poisoned inside you. What do you mean?
You see, a lot of times a person will be sitting there in a position of power as the teacher. The classroom setup puts the teacher in the position of power. The rules are you have to respect the teacher. And then the teacher says, you are like this, and you're not paying attention, or you're selfish. And they will start to say a few things like this. And the rules of politeness say that you can't defend yourself. Students look at their teachers, and if they see their teachers are violating the values that they talk about in the classroom, they're not going to be so interested. They're going to say, this person is talking to us, and what we're learning from this person is, you know, I'm going to tell you something, but I'm going to do the opposite. So they will learn to do the same. Just pay lip service and do the opposite.
So what you're saying is the teacher has to be a person of integrity who walks their talk.
Otherwise, you're not a teacher. You're just a parrot.
You must be aware that there are very few people who fall into this category. Teachers, I mean.
this is why if you're teaching mathematics, it's so much easier. 2 + 2 is 4, whether you're a good person or a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're teaching about values and life, people are going to really look at you and seeing if you walk your talk. Because the teacher is the role model. The teacher is exemplifying what is being said and also how you arrive at it. You see, if a teacher says, yeah, I also have a problem telling the truth, and these are the things that I do to make sure that my dishonesty is kept to a minimum, and this is my aim, you see, then it's not toxic because the teacher is being truthful.
I found the next 2 lines even more disconcerting. It reads, for example, self-restraint is a virtue, but taken to the extreme becomes self-inflicted oppression. And then you go on to say, the point where a value turns into a negative attitude is subtle. Now, most of us aren't that present inside to see this poisonous change occurring. We don't know. And you're drawing this to our attention. Tell us why.
One example that's quite easy to follow is you have a person, they're very thin, and they always think that they're eating too much. Now you can see that in comparison with the average, they're having very small portions. But they've created in their mind this idea that they're greedy. Maybe somebody accused them of that in a very extreme way, and so they try to eat less. And if you put them on the scale, you can see that their body weight is really low. Their bones are sticking out, but yet in their eyes they're fat. And they're trying, like anything, to restrain their eating with this feeling that, well, I'm a greedy person. It's a very extreme example, but I've seen it. And, self-restraint, when a person has really got it wrong and they oppress themselves, and everybody else can see that this person has some kind of psychological problem because it's really out of the norm, but the person just doesn't see it, you see. So there is where they need some therapy, or they need to see a doctor, but they become very, very fixed in their conviction that no, the problem is I'm greedy, and they will not listen. So that's a very difficult situation. And where you have a lot of moralizing going on in an environment, your values of respect and regard for the teacher who is being actually very oppressive will cause the right thing to become a very wrong thing. And people will start to feel bad about themselves and guilty where they don't need to. Feeling guilty when you haven't done something wrong is extremely widespread.
Tell us what you mean by moralizing in this context. You're referring to the conduct of the teacher. Mm-hmm. What you use this as an example. What do you mean?
You're selfish. You're smiling. That means you're being insolent. You're supposed to be serious. You don't ask questions. Don't challenge me. This means you're bad people, etc., etc., etc. And so it goes on and on and on. And I know you're lustful. You can't hide it from me. And it goes on. And there's such a lot of that happens. And especially around pretty young people or people who really want to be approved of. It's a setup for a very toxic situation. And there are many circumstances where values are being taught in that manner, and it is toxic. So we need to raise the question because it's so widespread. And if a person finds themselves in that situation, they need to know the signs to realize, look, I'm in a toxic situation, I think I better leave.
I want to go on then to the next paragraph. One danger of theorizing and moralizing is that those for whom it might be useful do not often listen, and those who do not have the character defects for which the moralizing is intended, in their eagerness to progress, can interpret the moralizing words as admonition and become depressed. That is quite a terrible conundrum.
And it really is a continuation of what we were just talking about, that you can be among a bunch of people who are committed to behaving badly, and you get that in schools situations, and that happens because they really don't respect the adults. They've seen too much hypocrisy, too many double standards, and they're enjoying being as naughty as possible because it's much more fun. So the teacher goes like this, and the students are really, when we got our break, it's lost because you haven't engaged that person. You haven't enabled that person to get a feel for their inner powers, their inner qualities. And then you have other people who really want to progress, but you look at them as you look at those first category, and then you're spoiling them. And this is because you haven't understood who you're talking to, what their mentality is, and that means that the teacher isn't as competent as they need to be. Because, one of the problems doing this kind of work with people requires a lot of skill, and highly skilled people expect to be highly paid.
True.
Teachers, being very low paid, you're not going to get very highly skilled people, but they're required to do highly skilled things. And there you have a real big problem, which has to do with the relationship between government and education.
Is there an answer to that problem in our lifetime?
Well, a government traditionally these days spends maximum amount of money on defense, you see, because they think security is the biggest issue. Now, there are some governments who were not doing that, and they decided to spend all the attention and money and so on educating the youth so that they would end up with a population of well-prepared people. This is an investment in your population, and that to me is a pretty high value. But if the government says no, the most important thing is to keep people down, then you will get the consequences of that, which is you'll get a very rebellious population that doesn't support you.
You use some interesting terminology in the next paragraph, and I'd like you to tell us why. Subtlety is important. You should not be sensitive to the extent that you become volatile and impressionable, but be sensitive and intuitive enough to recognize truth. What do you mean by subtlety, and how does an individual know when they're subtle or the opposite of subtle or gross?
When teaching this course, I used a number of different teaching methods, and the one that I found was really good for this was the system of dialogue, where you really get people to speak and say what they think and say what they feel. The others are strongly encouraged to be attentive, to listen, and really feel where that person is coming from. This type of situation encourages a lot of subtlety in terms of picking up body language, very subtly expressed emotions and feeling, and all of this tended to enable the group of people, the groups of people, to be much more truthful, to be willing to be vulnerable, to feel that they're in a safe environment, they're not going to be punished for opening up. And all of this created a sense where people understood things much more quickly, and became like the whole group became more sensitive.
Wow, that must have been pretty special.
Very special. After these months of this type of education, if I would meet the people who had done this with me, 10, 15 years later, they never forgot. Because it went into their beings, into their hearts, into their lives to such an extent that it really did do what education can do, which is it upheld them for the rest of their lives. And that's, to me, a wonderful sign of success.
That is a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure that will sit deeply with the viewers as well. Whenever you hear a ring of truth, you are inwardly compelled to take note. That is lovely. I remember a quote by a famous philosopher to that effect as well. This sits deeply with most people, doesn't it?
This is why I like the system of dialogue, because it allowed whatever the question under discussion was to have its own life, to talk to the group, as it were, about its own truth. And whenever anybody said something that was really truthful, you could feel it in the atmosphere, and everything, we just stopped everything and said, okay, now let's just feel the truth of this so that it really goes in. And that's something that becomes part of your existence, part of your life. Otherwise, these things, very rarely can you cause them to show themselves. They usually remain very hidden. And we deal in only platitudes.
I think, though, the problem is that it's not often that we hear something of depth and wisdom that contains truth. It's an exception. That which you've written in these books, it's unusual. It's an exception. It's not the rule. Most people will prefer fiction, and this is fact.
And fact has a great deal of power. And when you learn how to, coax these truths to show themselves and to come out, and the people who are working with them are really like part of it, it's a very creative process, and the people are kind of awakened. They get insights, and you see the facilitator who can do this is really practicing a very important art of awakening and sensitizing a person to attributes of their being that is completely subtle.
When you use the word awakening in this context, what are you referring to?
I think that people's consciousness is dulled and kind of crass, and so all the subtleties are, they remain asleep, as it were, non-active, deactivated. And what I'm trying to do all the time is to get people to work with their conscience, to listen to the voice of conscience, to listen to each other, so that it really moves you away from this ego position to something that corresponds much more to the reality of yourself as a spiritual being.
I'm looking at the top of page 21 again, where you referred to the point where a value turns into a negative attitude is subtle. You, Sister Denise, have the power to put words to the intangible. And you obviously draw on your knowledge and spirituality and your wisdom to do this. Not everybody has that power. Actually, very few people have that power. Is it necessary to verbalize what is going on inside of you to understand? Can one just not feel it and achieve what is contained in your books in a feeling, intuitive way rather than a verbal way? Do you know what I'm asking?
I know very well what you're asking, and this is why I like, as I said before, the dialogue system, because it gets people to put words on what they're feeling.
And you feel that this is important?
Well, it makes them real. And it also means that they can access it again. You see, when you're feeling something and you don't know what it is, you kind of lose the ability to hold it and own it. And so I think it's very important to find the words and express what it is that's going on in you, because it's deep. And when you put words on it, it comes from, you can say, a more subconscious space into the conscious arena. And it means that you can talk about something which is very intangible. And if you don't put words on it, you can't talk about it. And then you kind of lose it.
That is a skill most people don't even realize that they should cultivate. Well, ownership of your feelings. That's pretty deep.
Yes, it's deep. All of these things are deep, and this is why they're really best for adults, because adults have sufficient life experience to know the importance of this, to understand the subtleties, and to value the subtleties. A child is still discovering about life, and once you're in the adult world and you know what is work, what is family, this and that, it's a very different position in the journey of life to be in, and this is really the time where you can take responsibility for your values, and then you become the example for the younger generation while they are figuring out their values, you see. So I'm really focusing on the adult learners because of this.
Okay, Sister Denise, I think we'll say goodbye to you right now. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Sister Denise has shared the qualities that students should have, the qualities that a good teacher should have, and how to establish a good symbiosis between the two. And what I liked about it is that both the student and the teacher are on equal footing, which means that neither person is imposing on the other, unduly imposing on the other. It's a very respectful and beautiful environment in which mutual learning can take place. A very powerful message, and I would invite you to look at your life, whether you're a student or a teacher, and ask yourself whether any of what was shared today has some relevance for you. So Sister Denise, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us. We will see you again for the next episode. Take care and goodbye.